All right. Hello. Hi. Welcome, everyone. Welcome, welcome. Thank you so much for being here on this wonderful Wednesday afternoon in June here, at least in France, it's the afternoon. I'm Paige. I lead programming and community at the Nature Tech Collective. And before we dive in, I'm going to do just a few quick housekeeping notes as usual. Uh, Everyone's on mute right now. You will be until we open up the Q&A. That's always one of the richest parts of the sessions. So please do, if you have questions, post them in the chat until that opens up. If something resonates, if you have a question forming, if you want to flag a resource or make a connection, drop it in. We read it, of course, so does the community. And one thing I want to ask, of course, before we start is to please, please, please rename yourself to your name and company. That really helps just for networking purposes and, of course, also in the Q&A. Okay, now moving on to why we're here in general, that matters. There's a question that the writer and the facilitator Priya Parker asks at the start of any kind of gathering worth having, and it's, why these specific people in this specific place at this specific moment. And of course, I kind of always like to take a stab at answering that a little bit. But yeah, we're at one of those moments where a sector is being built in real time. Nature tech is not mature yet. The tools are emerging, the policy frameworks are arriving, the markets are early, and the people on this call, you're all technologists, practitioners, ecologists, policymakers, investors, corporates. We've got a real range of stakeholders in this ecosystem. And you're amongst the people who are going to determine whether this sector delivers on its promise or gets stuck in the same patterns that have slowed other attempts at systems change. So that means that the knowledge in this room is important. What you've learned from a failed project, from a data set that didn't hold up, from a regulation that created unintended consequences, all of that is really, really interesting. And the only way it travels is if we share it. So that's also kind of why the Nature Tech Collective exists. We're the infrastructure for that sharing. We're a sector building organization, and also, beyond our wider ecosystem, a tight-knit community of people who've decided that collaboration is more important than competition, that the pie is not yet big enough for any of us to be precious about what we know. So yeah, the implicit rules of this space are very simple. Share as much as you can, be critical if you'd like, but constructive, of course. We're all figuring this out. If you know somebody that should be in these conversations, bring them. If you have a resource that's relevant, share it. And there we go. And so now kind of moving on to the global context. I'm sorry that my video is freezing. It doesn't matter too much, though it's the words. We're living through a really quite a significant moment in how the world is beginning to put a number on nature. TNFD is pushing large corporates to report on their nature-related risks and dependencies. The EU's deforestation regulation is reshaping supply chains. At COP30, a biodiversity credits policy forum was launched. Markets are emerging to quantify and trade biodiversity units, echoing in some respects the trajectory of carbon pricing mechanisms over the past decade. So we're at an early but really quite an accelerating moment at the same time. And against that backdrop, England has done something that no country has done before. In February 2024, Biodiversity Net Gain became mandatory for most developments. I'm going to stop there explaining anything because actually Matthew's going to go into it. And actually, now to introduce, I'm delighted to be joined by Matthew Brown, co-CEO of Verna. Verna builds software for nature recovery data challenges, and their platform Mycelia has become the leading tool, or one of the leading tools, for BNG compliance in England. They've got, I'll let you introduce the rest. Matthew, welcome. Thank you so much for being here. Yes, can you tell us more about yourself and about Verna as well?
Absolutely, yeah. Thank you very much for inviting me. It's really exciting to be here and to see some names on the screen that I know as well. So thank you everyone for joining. So as you said, I'm one of the co-founders of Verna and one of the co-CEOs as well. in terms of my personal background, before starting Verna, I worked first of all in high performance computing, and then a bit randomly in environmental policy. So, for example, I led the climate change mitigation team at DEFRA for a few years. And in a way, Verna sort of brings together those two perspectives. So, our mission at Verna is using software to radically accelerate nature recovery on a global scale. And to try and do that, what we're building is the global insight and management platform for nature recovery programs. So we are not a data provider. We know loads of great nature tech companies doing that, many of them in the collective in this room, many of them we know well and are looking forward to collaborating with. Uh, we are kind of excited that we're at a time in history where nature has sort of never been more measured, and that's brilliant. What we're looking to build is the intelligence layer that helps people to manage that data and to understand it as it's coming into them and then make good decisions based on it. And ultimately, we want to do that for all nature data and all nature programs the whole world over. That is obviously a big, hairy goal. So, for our first step on that journey, we focused in on nature projects being run under the Biodiversity Net Gain methodology, which you were mentioning. Very exciting, relatively new approach that's focused on systematically improving nature. And it's an approach that's been uh, pioneered here in the UK, but increasingly has a lot of input from around the world and is spreading around the world across sectors and countries. So if people have heard of Verna before, it's probably because of our work on biodiversity net gain. Our software product for BNG, which you mentioned, called Mycelia, has been very widely adopted by organizations using the BNG framework for their nature work.
All right, terrific. Thank you for setting the context and to set more context for those who aren't familiar with Biodiversity Net Gain, which I assume is not that many people in the room, but still, can you walk us through what it actually is and why it's also become such a big moment for nature recovery?
Absolutely. So at its heart, biodiversity net gain is a methodology for calculating the biodiversity value of a site and then trying to measurably improve that. The way it works is, it's a model. It's got to make some modeling assumptions and simplifications. And the one that BNG has chosen is that it assigns each hectare of habitat a score, essentially. And that score is based on what type of habitat it is. So the rarer habitats being considered more valuable get higher scores. And then also what condition it's in. So the better the condition it's in, the higher.
Okay. I'm sorry, everyone. I've
Did
either
I did I
frozen.
disappear for a second there?
Yes, there we go. You're back.
I don't know what
Um,
happened. Got
I'm
some
trying
kind
to
of
figure out.
disconnection. Sorry. How far did we get? I was talking about assigning scores based on habitat type and condition. Did I get much further than that?
No, not much further than that. Yeah, it was just about 30 seconds ago.
Okay, cool. Apologies, everybody. I don't normally have connection problems, so obviously it would happen during a live webinar.
Yeah.
So those scores are called biodiversity units in the kind of BNG jargon, and they basically give you a score for the biodiversity value that is in place on the site, and they also mean that you can set quantitative targets or regulatory requirements for improving that score. So that methodology by itself means that you have a kind of like a data standard, something that is consistent and scalable as a methodology that can be adopted by any organization anywhere. And we're increasingly seeing take up of BNG, for example, amongst national and multinational corporations that have large land footprints. It also means that if you want to, if you're a policymaker, you can use it as the basis for a regulation. And that's what's happened in England, as you mentioned, Paige, where there is now a legal requirement for at least a 10% improvement in that BNG score for developments that are going through the planning system and seeking planning permission. And I have a slide actually that I can show for people who are interested in kind of the um, sort of key points of how that works in England.
Nice.
So has that come through okay?
Yes. No, you wanted to share. This slide in
Yeah,
particular.
was that
No,
not?
I wasn't seeing that. This slide.
Sorry. Something is my system is not very happy with Zoom today, it would seem.
Well, that's okay.
How's that?
Yes, there it is.
There we go. Okay, right. So, BNG in England as a mandatory policy, to our knowledge, is the first time anywhere in the world has set out a law that requires a quantitative net gain in biodiversity. As I said, as a condition of the actual planning system. So England, in common with many countries, I would guess, has for a long time had biodiversity and nature requirements in its planning system. But before BNG came along, they were not quantified and they were often kind of soft rather than enforced. So it might be
Hmm.
negotiated on a case-by-case basis. You might have an ecology report and there'd be back and forth with the planning authority. But what we now have is a situation where there is a mathematical calculation for every site on the biodiversity units that are in place now and how much it has to increase by. And there's loads of benefits of this, but we've put 4 of them on this slide. We stole this slide, by the way, from the excellent unconference that Nature Tech Collective ran a few weeks ago.
Woo.
So there's a lot of you get consistency from this system. So everybody everywhere in the country is using the same way of measuring and improving biodiversity. That can lead to clarity, that people know the rules that they're playing by and the score they need to achieve. You get scalability. So even within our mycelia system, we've already had over 10,000 nature projects being tracked, and they're all being done in the same way. And it can feed through to transparency for everybody, including the public. So planning authorities can publish statistics about how much biodiversity is increasing in their area, for example. So there's a lot of benefits here. Um, it's also unavoidably quite complicated because biodiversity itself is quite complicated, as everybody here knows. So
Right.
the BNG model is quite complicated, and that creates a lot of challenges and also a lot of opportunities for nature tech as a sector to help. So what I thought might be helpful at this point is to actually show you the scoring methodology itself and how this actually works. So I can bring that up if that sounds like a helpful thing to do.
Right. Yes, the very complicated spreadsheet that
The
kind of
very
prevented it.
complicated spreadsheet. Yeah, people who have had to tangle with one of these kind of wear the scars on their back. Um, so as that screen. Yes, okay, you can see that spreadsheet.
That's
Brilliant.
working. Yes.
So this is an example of what's called a biodiversity net gain metric. And it is instantiated in the form of a huge Excel spreadsheet, basically. So there's over 20 tabs along the bottom here. We're looking at one page in particular, and you can see that this information is set out in tabular form. So here I've got uh, rows which each correspond to a habitat parcel. Each row has got tons of bits of data and information about it. The rows are really long, by the way. They go off the right-hand side of the screen, even on my quite big monitor. So by the time I've got to the right-hand side, I've forgotten what was on the left-hand side. I have to scroll back, etc. And if you want to try and understand what's going on here, you have to follow these habitat parcels across multiple different tables on different pages to see what's going on with them. So there's immediately quite a lot to grapple with from the point of the kind of sheer volume and density of information.
Right.
Uh, and also under the bonnet, there's quite a lot of different rules going on. It's quite a complex model. There's lots of different formulae and macros. It's totally excusable because biodiversity itself is complex. If you want to have a model that has any kind of faithfulness in trying to capture some of its complexity, then that model itself is going to be complex. But that
Absolutely.
leads to a model that can be difficult to grapple with.
And so who has to grapple with this? What are they being asked to do with?
Yeah. So, I mean, depends a bit on the project and the situation, but there are kind of a few typical stages to working with this methodology that might involve different people along those stages. And potentially different organizations as well. And in a way, they kind of map onto what would you expect the ecological process to be for a site that you're trying to understand and then improve. So you're probably going to want to do a baseline at the outset, understand what's there. So you're going to want to have an ecologist do a walkover survey and then fill in the elements of this model that are about that situation. What's the starting baseline? So you can probably see this tab we're on here is called on-site habitat baseline. We have other tabs like this one down here that have baseline in the name as well. So based on that expert survey, that ecologist is going to want to use the criteria that are baked into the model and then also apply their own expert judgment to decide what should go in these rows. So what are the habitat types that are on site and what conditions are they in? And there is expert judgment in there right from the start because, for example, there are rules to decide the condition ratings, but there is a certain amount of qualitative judgment needed to work out where things fall on that scale. And then once you've got your baseline, you're going to want to make a plan for improving the biodiversity value of the site. And you might want to consider various different scenarios. So say, for example, your project is that you're building a housing development, you're building some new houses. You need to think about what habitats are those houses going to go on top of? What are they flattening, basically? And that tells you what from these baseline tabs you're losing and therefore the kind of loss in biodiversity value at the outset.
Mm-hmm.
You also then want to think about what habitats can you create on the site around those houses or enhance if there are good habitats in place that you could make even better. So, and somebody has to kind of devise those scenarios and then score them using this spreadsheet. So, for example, looking at tabs like ones that are about creating new habitats, we've got on-site habitat creation here, on-site habitat enhancement, and these are all places where you can record that kind of thing. And that typically might be an ecologist as well, because it's the use of the interaction with an understanding of this model is quite an ecologically complex thing, but probably involve many other people as well. So in that example we were looking at there of a housing estate, you're probably going to have to involve your planners, who are the ones who are actually drawing up the plans for the development,
Yeah.
potentially your landscape architects who are thinking about the landscaping of the site and how that sits together. So that's potentially one of the most involved parts of the process, is that kind of iterative working out what scenarios we want to look at, what's the biodiversity outcome of those, how do we optimize in the mix with all the other factors. And then there's kind of a third stage that depending on how the project you're doing is being assured or maybe in some cases governed, there may be other people who need to scrutinize and QA that data, basically. So if we take the example of the mandatory BNG requirements in the English planning system, this Excel document we're looking at in that context is effectively a legal document. It's going to form part of the planning authorization for the site. And once it's approved, this legal framework comes with a 30-year requirement for delivering these habitat improvements and for having that monitored over those 30 years. So it's a really important legal basis.
Mm-hmm.
So it will be checked in the local planning authority by their planning officers and potentially their in-house ecologists to satisfy themselves that this is like a good plan, it makes sense, it's following all the rules, etc.
All right. So quite a complex multi-data, multi-stakeholder uh, spreadsheet project. And so obviously, as you built Verna, mycelia, you talked to a lot of people that were required to do this. What are the things that were going wrong in the process, or what does it look like when this data challenge isn't being handled properly?
Yes, good question, to which there are lots of answers. So we just saw it's quite a complex model. That's unavoidable because biodiversity is a complex thing. You mentioned analogies to the trajectory the carbon sector went on in your introduction, and I had some involvement in that in my days as a policymaker. That was complex enough. And then when you want to go into biodiversity, you can't, for example, reduce everything to a single number like you sometimes can with carbon. So it is complicated. That creates a few kind of categories of challenge. One is it's just quite hard to understand and predict the behavior of this model. If you want to optimize against it, you can't really hold in your head and predict what if I change X, what's the output of the BNG model going to do? So, for example, in that sort of fictional scenario we were thinking of a housing development, if you move a housing unit a few meters west for whatever reason, it could be for an operational reason, it's hard to work out in your head how that will affect your biodiversity score. So there's that challenge of kind of optimizing against it. It's also a bit of a challenge of translating all of that dense tabular data that we looked at into a real world story. So if you want to do that cognitively based on the Excel we were looking at, you need to sort of find a habitat parcel and then trace it across multiple sheets of the spreadsheet, to understand, for example, what's that habitat transforming into, or how is its condition being changed. That's quite a hard story to piece together in your head. And there is also a challenge. I mentioned the QA element. So if you're a regulator, for example, or an ecology consultant wanting to quality assure one of these things, there's just a lot of ways to break it or to go wrong. So there's lots of ways that it's possible to break the rules of the model itself. So there's any number of places where a cell in that Excel spreadsheet might turn red, and that means there's something going wrong. You've broken the rules. But beyond that, you also want to scrutinize the ecological um, validity, basically, of the underlying data
Sure.
that's been entered into it, because you can enter stuff into these cells and nothing goes red and it follows all the rules, but maybe the ecologist hasn't classified that habitat correctly, for example. And so when we set out more than 2 years ago now to try and build a piece of software that would help with these challenges, we talked, as you'd expect, we talked to lots of potential users, and we found that a lot of these data challenges were basically overwhelming people. So one example is that local planning authorities have people called validation officers, whose job it is right at the start of the planning pipeline to check all of the data that comes into a local planning authority alongside a planning application, and check that the data is present that is needed and that it's following all the basic rules before it then goes any further downstream into the process. And they're doing that for, at a small planning authority, hundreds of planning applications a year, and at a
Hmm.
large one, thousands. And being hit with this spreadsheet and having to QA it and understand, what does this actually mean for this development, and am I happy with the plan? They simply did not have the capacity to do that, or actually the skill, which is no slight on them, but this is something that's been developed by expert ecologists over more than a decade.
Right.
To ask somebody who's not an ecologist to pick this up and understand what's going on is a bit of a challenge. So there's a load of challenges around the underlying model, and then I guess there's probably a final category of challenges about the fact that it's implemented in Excel. And there are good reasons for that choice. I can understand why people made that choice at the outset. Excel is highly portable. You can ferry it around however you like, email, whatever. It's a format that basically nearly everybody understands and can use. But it comes with some sort of built-in limits as well. Like, there's limits to what you can do with the user interface in Excel, and so uh, how intuitive it can be as a tool and what kind of automatic tooling you can build into it is limited. It is also relatively easy to break it in a kind of tampering way. I mean, not necessarily always deliberate tampering. We have seen some nefarious deliberate tampering, but often accidental breakages where the underlying formulae in the spreadsheet get mucked about with. It doesn't quite work anymore. And also doing it as a load of spreadsheets that are winging around the planning system. There are now literally tens of thousands of these in play. It forces the problems around version control and file management onto your users, because Excel can't do any of that by itself. So there's no kind of single system of record for people on the practitioner side making these plans, or on the regulator side tracking and assuring them. So you end up with the problem probably everybody's seen in their day-to-day work in other contexts of, your data is kind of fragmented. What was the latest version of the spreadsheet, and where do we put it on SharePoint? And it's it gets lost, it gets out of date. You get different people looking at different versions. The regulators commented on version 3, but I thought we were working with version 4, etc., etc. So tons of challenges basically, and they're all really fundamentally about data and analysis.
Hmm.
So software and tech in general is perfectly positioned to help.
Right, and that's also why you're here today, because your technology is solving those issues. So yeah, let's talk about mycelia. Can you show us what it actually looks like in practice to solve some of those challenges?
Yeah, absolutely. So what we tried to build with Mycelia and are still building, as everybody who works in tech will know, you're never done,
Right.
is a software system that tries to help with all of these data problems and basically help people working within Biodiversity Net Gain to be more successful. I can bring it up in a second and show you how it works. I won't try and give a full demo. That would take way more time than we have. But so I might kind of zoom through it in what may seem a fairly incoherent way. But I'll try and pick out a couple of features that are sort of nice illustrations of how nature tech can help with these kinds of challenges. So I would attempt to share the correct screen. Let's see if I have any
Mhm.
more success this time. Uh, how's that? Is that coming through okay?
I'm seeing I'm seeing mycelia. Perfect.
Excellent, thank you. Yeah, so this is my C. This is just the kind of homepage that I've landed on, and this is a Verna internal instance of Mycelia. But if you were an ecology consultancy or a local planning authority, you would see the name of your organisation up there. And probably the easiest thing to show you some of the ways in which we've solved some of the problems we were talking about is to create a new project. So I'll do that. And what I get here is kind of a blank homepage for this BNG project on Mycelia. And typically the first thing I'm going to want to do is um, drag some of the key data and files for this project into this box here. So I will do that from off screen. I will drag in a few sort of representative files, one of which will be the metric that we were just looking at. Uh, so that spreadsheet that we were just looking at the complexity of it, I'll put that into Mycelia as well, and we can see what Mycelia does with it. So all those files have gone in, and in the case of the metric file, which is this Excel file that we can see here, Mycelia has read all of the data in that file, run its own QA checks on it, and also rerun all of the biodiversity net gain model on it. Because we've rebuilt that model inside Mycelia. We don't trust the spreadsheet and its outputs because of that problem that spreadsheets are easy to monkey with, whether deliberately or accidentally. So we don't want to trust it. And then what Mycelia does is it runs some automatic analyses on that to give people automatic advice, and it also provides some tools that help people to um, investigate that data in easier, more intuitive ways so they can then apply their expert judgment to it. So I'll just point out a few of these things. So we get an instant validation check on the basics. This is that job I was talking about that the validation officer has to do at a local planning authority. Is this spreadsheet breaking the rules in any way? In this particular instance, it is, and I could click through there to find out which rules have been broken and get copy pastable advice for whoever the author of this thing is to say, here's what you've got to fix if you want it to work. We also get a risk analysis where it says 12 ecology risks here. So this is where we're going beyond just the open and shut rules of the model. You're not allowed that value in that cell or whatever. And we're looking at patterns that we've worked with about 30 ecologists across the country to asking them, when you are combing through these tables of data, what are the warning signs that you're looking for that make you think, oh, I need to just dig a bit deeper there? Is there a risk there, or do I really believe that? And we've encoded those rules into Mycelia. So for any given metric, all or none of these might trigger, but we've got some examples here like potential for unrecorded irreplaceable habitat, or interventions that are trying to get a habitat into a really good condition, but that's a very difficult process for that particular
Mhm.
habitat type. So flagging those risks up. So those are some of the kind of automatic errors or warnings. I thought I would also show you the metric diagram that we have. So I mentioned that one of the challenges with that spreadsheet is trying to get in your head a picture of what's the story of this site from a nature perspective and trying to piece that together from all those rows of data. And this tool is to make that a lot easier. So you can basically see in one place what is the story here. So each of these cards that we're looking at is a habitat, and they're arranged into 3 different columns. So the left-hand column here is the baselines, what's on site at the start. The middle column is the interventions that are being proposed. What are they going to change? Destroying some habitats, creating some new ones, enhancing some. And then the right-hand column is what will the site look like after those interventions have been carried out. This data in the right-hand column doesn't actually appear explicitly in the spreadsheet, but Mycelia can deduce it from all the information that is in the spreadsheet. And if I hover my mouse over any one of these cards, Mycelia draws for me the left to right flow lines that show what's there at the start, in this case, 3 hectares of blackthorn scrub, what then happens to it in the middle column. In this case, we're losing some, retaining some, enhancing some, and then what does that feed through to on the right-hand side in the outcome? And right away, this is a lot easier than trying to do it by tracing across multiple tabs of Excel, but I can also do things like say, oh, I just want to look at the hedgerows or something like that, and then I can whittle my diagram down to that. There's loads of other stuff I could show you, like there's tools around the 30-year monitoring, for example. But mindful of time, I thought I would just show you one more thing, which is that recently we've started to build AI into Mycelia. We have a strong view that if it's done in the right way, AI can be a net good for nature and the environment, and the key is to use it to get positive environmental outcomes. So I've dragged in an additional metric here, a new one, and this is one in which the applicant has embedded photographs of the habitats. And what Mycelia does now is it uses AI to analyze those photos and flag up where the classification that has been assigned to the habitat in the metric might not be right. And obviously AI is not foolproof, so it's not saying this is definitely wrong, it's just saying you might want to take a look at this. So in this example here of this woodland, Mycelia is saying habitat may not match photo, and we can click through to find out what's going on. And it says the AI thinks this might actually be broadleaf woodland rather than coniferous, which, looking at it, those do look like broadleaves. And I get its rationale as to why it thinks that. And I also get, importantly, a suggestion for what additional evidence would actually help to decide this. So if you're an ecologist or a regulator who's quality assuring this, you may want to go back to the person who filled this metric in and say, actually, could you give us this evidence, please? And then we'll be able to make a definitive assessment or judgment. So that's the stuff I thought would be worth pointing out as kind of illustration of ways in which software can help with these challenges. Lots more in there if people are interested, but mindful of time.
Thanks, Matthew. You wanted to kind of bring this to life also with a real example of when a public body is using Mycelia to manage their portfolio of projects. Was that included in the demo, or are we moving on to lessons learned?
I can mention a couple of examples. I'll keep it brief, but
Yeah.
for example, we have a very innovative ecology consultancy in the private sector using Mycelia now. People may have heard of them. They're called Cura Terrae. And they, for example, are making use of those automatic checks that I showed you to check for the rules, check for ecology risks on all of the biodiversity net gain work that they do for their clients.
Mm-hmm.
These guys are obviously expert ecologists. That's their trade. So they could, in principle, do all of that manually. But rather than spending hours combing through that data to find all those potentially little mistakes or areas of concern, Mycelia can flag it up to them in seconds so that they can then spend their time on where their expert judgment actually matters and kind of makes the difference. And you mentioned public bodies. We have over 100 local planning authorities using Mycelia. And one example there is Northumberland Council. They are one of the largest planning authorities in England. So they get thousands of planning applications per year. And one of the jobs that they have is deciding when the planning application for development comes in, is this ecologically important enough that we should put a legal requirement on its biodiversity net gain plan? We should enter it into that 30-year regulatory monitoring regime. And they were one of our earliest users, and they worked with us to develop some automatic checks for this in Mycelia. I didn't show them just now, but Mycelia will flag up when there are habitats in the biodiversity plan that are significant enough that they should be considered for that rigorous legal monitoring approach. And then automatically, if then the user does want to enter them into that approach, it will automatically set up the 30-year monitoring data tracking, so they can use mycelia to track that over time. That's a couple of examples.
Thank you. Terrific. Yeah, that gives a little bit more color. Um, okay, yeah, and like you said, kind of being mindful of time. What are the lessons learned here working with, hundreds of organizations so far?
I have a slide on this too,
Yeah,
again cribbed from the unconference. So
Verna run
here,
2 sessions. Yes.
and thank you for the opportunity to do that as well. So here are 4 things that we've learned along the way that hopefully are kind of broadly applicable, rather than just being about mycelia and biodiversity net gain. So one of them, nature recovery is a team sport. So something that we realized fairly early on is that lots of people have to get involved in nature recovery projects, and it takes decades. This is all stuff that won't be new to people on this call, but what that means is that coordination is actually a real problem, even for one project. But once you scale up to hundreds or thousands, then without dedicated software, it's
Mm.
basically impossible to do that coordination job. Second lesson, nature is more than a map, is the phrase that we've put in here. There's a kind of an understandable instinct to reach for GIS tools in this space, and they have a very valuable role to play. And it is understandable because obviously nature is fundamentally a spatial thing. You need to know where habitats are, how big they are, what shape they are, etc. But spatial data is not the only aspect of the problem. The ecological data matters about telling you about the habitats. The chronological data matters about what's happening to them over time. And that's how we ended up with things like the flow diagram that I showed you.
Hmm.
That's a more intuitive way of showing the chronological story alongside the spatial one. Really important point that you can't take the human expert out of the process. There's tons that software can do to 10x or 100x the value that the human expert can get out of their time, but fundamentally sometimes you need an ecologist to actually bring their expertise to this stuff. And I kind of already made this pitch earlier. AI's impact on nature can outweigh its footprint. We actually wrote a whole article about this on our website because we were um, ended up in this debate quite a bit, and we're quite passionate about it. But done in the right way, this is an unlock for nature impact.
Nice. Well, yeah, we should really run a session on that actually, because it's such a recurring question, but really interested in learning it. Okay, before I ask the last question, I'm going to remind the audience that we're going to unmute you very soon for the Q&A. So prepare your questions, put them in the chat, post them in your minds, but do rename yourself to your name and organization so it makes it easier for everyone. Thank you. And yeah, Matthew, what's next? Where are you going with this?
I love that you're asking this question right now because this is a very exciting moment. We're very excited about what's coming next, kind of for the whole world, given where AI is right now, and also what we're working on. So I said right at the start that our ultimate goal is to build the global insight and management platform for nature programs, and that our work with BNG is kind of a first step towards that. So our ultimate aim is to accelerate nature recovery everywhere, whether or not it's using the particular biodiversity net gain methodology. So what we're working on right now is taking all of these learnings from mycelia and building a new platform that can do similar things, but working with all kinds of nature projects and all kinds of nature data. And that is kind of feasible now, we think, because of the amazing new power that AI brings to the software world. So what we're working on at the moment is harnessing that to kind of take in and analyze any data, whether that's spreadsheets like we were looking at, PDF reports written by ecology consultants, geospatial files, etc., etc., and then map that into, transform it into a structured view of nature recovery programs that can give people the meaning and the insight they need to actually understand what's going on and make decisions based on it, rather than kind of drowning in those ever increasing streams of nature data that are coming in. So we're really hopeful this is going to be kind of a whole new level of usefulness for the customers we're already working with through mycelia, but also additional segments as well. So for example, we're talking to about 50 multinational organizations at the moment, mixture of kind of private, public, third sector. But the key linking them is that they all have sway over really huge land areas and nature budgets. So if we can help them, then that can really help the world from a nature perspective. So yeah, very excited right now.
Well, congratulations and look forward to kind of, I don't know, hearing more about it, featuring it when it becomes relevant. Um, all right, thanks again for all of that. Yeah, fantastic context setting, getting deep into the data and everything. And now, audience, you are able to unmute. I'm personally returning to the kind of gallery of faces setting on Zoom so I can see everyone and opening up the chat so I can see what's been happening there. It looks like you guys have been answering each other's questions, which is fantastic. But let's see, who do we start with? Do we have any questions in the chat? Dave, person from Regen Network, did you want to ask yours out loud or was it answered? Excited to learn more. That wasn't a question. Okay, sorry. I do have to like, and I have a human brain. I'm not an AI that can do this as fast as everything. Uh, Steve, was your question answered? Perfect. Are there plans to translate these spreadsheets into software from Sebastian Wallace?
Yeah, would
Uh,
you like me to have a go at that page?
yeah, please. And Sebastian, if you want to also come on camera and tell us what organization you're from or anything, you feel welcome to do that. But yeah, Matthew, go ahead.
Cool. So, to an extent, that's kind of been done by us and by some other nature tech providers, some of whom I think are on this call, because we couldn't solve many of the challenges of this model and the fact that it had been created in Excel without rebuilding it in a kind of proper software setting. So Mycelia has a full and faithful recreation of the BNG engine inside it. I know some other providers have done that too in order to power their platforms. So really, this is an example of the nature tech sector responding to a market need and bringing the innovation to do that. Um, Kind of in response to that, I think the UK government has talked about a long-term aim to try and bring some kind of unified API to it themselves, or some kind of similar approach. I think that's going to take quite a while because, understandably, government needs to do things in a sort of consensual way. But if we get there in the end, I think it'll be because the nature tech community kind of showed what was possible and pointed the way.
Thank you. He also says, this is great. Does DMRV feed into this too?
Oh, I know what MRV is. I don't know what DMRV is.
I guess digital.
Oh, okay,
Um,
cool. Yeah, yeah, absolutely. Thank you. That's probably obvious, wasn't it? So yes, we have some of those tools already. So I didn't show you the monitoring sections in Mycelia, but they provide a structured way for people to track whether these habitat
Yeah.
changes are following the trajectory they're supposed to
No,
be
the other one.
over
Get
the 30 years.
organisations for discussion.
Oops. Sorry, Luke. You're next up as a question, but Matthew, keep going.
Yeah, I didn't probably have much more to say, but I think probably there'll be others in the community and on this call who are more expert on this than I am. But there's a kind of a general paradigm shift that we might be just in the foothills of where tech can really transform how biodiversity monitoring is done. We're very excited about that, not because we're going to compete on creating the data streams. Like I said at the top, we're kind of deliberately agnostic about the primary data. We want to ingest it and help people understand it. But the fact that there are so many solutions coming along now, whether it's remote sensing, bioacoustics, eDNA, etc., that can just do a much more comprehensive, rapid, and cost-effective job than humans walking over sites. There's always going to be a role for humans walking over sites, but we should make that we should deploy that expensive capability where it's needed.
Yeah.
So I think it's an exciting future for DMRV, a phrase that I will use from now on.
Oh, you're preaching to the choir here at the very least. But okay, Luke from Canna Earth, your next. Is the tool primarily for LPAs reviewing the metric or for the project deliverers also, so they can validate their work up front?
These days, it's both. We started off focusing on LPAs, local planning authorities, because, like most people in this community, I guess, we're mission driven. And when we looked at the system as a whole and how can we help to make biodiversity net gain a success, the LPAs were the weakest point in the system. And I mean that in the nicest possible way. Like, I love them. They're my customers. I would say that to their faces. They just um, don't have the resources or the volume of in-house expertise to manage this on their own. So we started by helping them. What we then found along the way was that we'd built a load of tools that were actually useful for people in other parts of the process as well. So I mentioned Curator Eye, for example, are a consultancy that is using Mycelia to develop and quality assure their outputs for clients.
Thank you. Luke, I hope that answers it. And next we have Guy Pinjov from Conservation International. You have a series of questions. Did you want to come on camera and ask them out loud, or shall I? There you are.
Yeah, I'm happy to. Hi, everybody. It's mostly about the methodology, which I know has nothing to do with you, but being in the carbon space for a while, yeah, I just see a lot of holes in the biodiversity methodology, having a base, essentially a t=0 baseline. And I see that the answer is that habitat is a proxy, but that really is the same as a red project with an initial t=0 as your baseline, which is worse than historical non-dynamic red methodologies that have been in the press so often. So, I mean, from an ecological standpoint, this is a pretty tricky methodology, and I'm glad that we're doing something. But it's interesting to me that it's not raised more red flags.
Thank you, Guy, first of all, for coming on screen and saying that, because it's very nice to have a face to the question, and also for the challenge, because that's, it's really important to challenge these things. I might be able to, you're right that, like, I'm not an ecologist, and there's probably a limit to what I can say on this, but I might have some helpful thoughts to offer. Just to check though, when you say t=0, is t time in that?
Yeah. Um, Historical methodologies that I mentioned used 10 years of historical deforestation data as a proxy to project future deforestation rates.
Mm-hmm.
And we found out that didn't work very well because there's a lot of reasons that can go wrong when the future is not like the past.
Yeah.
And now newer methodologies use quasi-experimental techniques like nearest neighbor matching. But you can do that because with remote sensing, you can see forest habitat from space, but you can't see biodiversity to set a baseline with a quasi-experimental technique. So you can never have that power for additionality.
Yeah, yeah. This is bringing echoes for me of things I worked on in the carbon space as well, including national carbon targets under Kyoto and things like that, where the choice of the timing of the baseline was hugely consequential for whether people actually had to bother doing any carbon reductions. So I can make a kind of a sort of high level observation. And then there's a detailed point as well that you might be interested in, given your point around the baseline and the timing of that. The high level observation is uh, no model is perfect, and often the art is in trying to kind of find a model that is faithful enough that it gets you the outcomes that you're gunning for, but simple enough that people can use it in practice. And I think that's what the ecology community has tried to do with biodiversity net gain. There is plenty of debate, and has been plenty of debate, on whether that balance has been achieved, or whether some of the holes in the model, like for example that it's habitat based solely and it doesn't look at species, whether those limitations are so fundamental that it's not doing good. what I look at, because I'm not an ecologist myself, is the kind of broad view within the ecology community. And I think one thing that is good about BNG is that it was community led. It was developed from within the ecology community over more than a decade. And the metric itself went through kind of 4 major versions with lots of minor increments in between before it was ever made a regulatory standard. So it's not something government just kind of, whipped out and said we should all do this now. It was more like a community-led standard that government then adopted. So broadly in the ecology community, there is a lot of support for the idea that it is directionally helpful. It is making the right kinds of things happen, even if there is a lot of things you can challenge in the details of the scoring and whether it's getting everything right. So that was the high level thought. The point of detail you might have an interest in is that in the way that this methodology has been made a legal requirement in England, there is a provision for regulators to say, we think the biodiversity on this site has been degraded prior to you making your planning application, and we are going to hold you to a higher standard of what the site was at before. So, for example, if someone clears a load of biodiverse habitat off their site, but remote sensing data or previous surveys or whatever suggest, actually last summer, that was a really diverse scrub and woodland environment, the regulator can say, no, we want to take your baseline from when it was much more valuable before.
I just say that carbon methodologies are based off of IPCC good practice principles, so that's global best practice in science as well.
Fantastic. Yeah, and I am aware that I am getting off the end of my own expertise here, but I know that lots of people who are engaged in international communities like that, sort of on the biodiversity side, are also on working groups that have developed and continue to develop the biodiversity net gain metric.
Thank you, Matthew. And I imagine there's a few ecologists in the room that could help us make this a 1 or 2 hour conversation. But in the interest of allowing for David's extra question, David, did you want to come on screen as well if you're still around? Yes.
I don't know if y'all can see me. Good morning.
Morning.
Welcome, or hello from Santa Barbara, California. So I had just a quick question. We're also we've been past 8 months deep in developing bespoke artificial intelligence tools for ingestion, structuring of ecological data, and then building outcome-based modules on top of that data. And so we've been neck deep in trying to figure out the best way to ingest and structure data in a variety of forms, whether it comes from PDFs, nice structured data, an Excel spreadsheet, or otherwise, and develop kind of the durable knowledge graphs that are optimized for accurate and constrained artificial intelligence applications. And I was just kind of curious to hear more about your approach to that. If you're finding a best practice or something that's really working well for Verna on that front, in the spirit of just co-learning in a very dynamic space.
David, you said a lot of words there that make me think that it would be really good to talk to you, because you said a lot of words that we say in a lot of our internal conversations as well. So where are you doing this work, David?
Well, we started our space in building our own registry program and registry technology system for both for carbon and biodiversity, and have registered projects around the world. But what we're finding, obviously, in a pretty soft market, is being able to package up ecological data in better ways that tell stories and meet the market where it's at for reporting or risk management or credit or asset development is pretty important. And all of that really is, how do you ingest, organize, and structure data and tell the right stories, essentially, to the right people in the right places. So that's where we're at now in our evolution and how we frankly continue this work of verifying impact, bringing it to the market, and just finding the right way to deliver that data to the market. So, I'm appreciating how you're approaching this, given we built, for example, our own registry agent review that goes through detailed project developer applications. with a bunch of structured and unstructured data, and similarly, is trying to provide confidence levels on completeness and relative to the requirements of the registry program, et cetera. And it's a really deep learning space for us that we're eager to continue to find colleagues in the space who are approaching it and just understand how we all do better to accelerate bringing more capital off the sidelines.
That's super interesting. Thank you. I would love to drop you a line if it's all right, and maybe chat one-to-one. There's a little bit of secret sauce in what we're working on now. So depending on kind of whether
Fair
you're
enough.
in a kind of commercial or academic environment or whatever, but we should work out what we can talk about. I should say my co-founder and I decided to make Verna a for-profit venture for the scaling that a commercial model affords. We've actually both previously co-founded charities, but we think the way to get the best impact on the mission is by scaling the company as fast as possible, and revenue engines are important for that. So we do have to be a little bit careful about the commercial
Totally
sensitivity.
appreciate that. Respect that.
But I bet there's a positive conversation we can have nonetheless. So I'll look forward to that.
That sounds good.
Lovely. Well, yeah, you're in the right place. Okay, well, we have about 4 minutes left. We can use it for any last question that wants to manifest itself, or give you that time back. I'm just gonna give 20 seconds of silence.
Thank you for all the supportive messages in the chat.
Yes, I was gonna say you're getting lots of gratitude, as am I.